Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree added a lot of new weapons and weapon classes to the game. And today, I want to talk to you about great katanas. They're like regular katanas, except bigger, because regular katanas simply weren't anime enough. Now I suspect there's a lot of weebs who are going to go crazy over these, because their moveset's pretty darn badass. So today, I'm going to talk about the great katana moveset, how to get all three great katanas available in Shadow of the Erdtree, the unique ash of where each comes with, and then wrap everything up with my own experiences using them. Spoiler alert, there's one that I like a little bit more than the rest. Now overall, my favorite weapon's still the backhand blades. If you want to see my video on that, I'll link it up in the card down below. You can watch it after this. But also, if that's not your style, then look forward to my upcoming video on the light greatswords, one of the most interesting weapon classes with some really cool entries. So be sure to get subscribed, that way you won't miss the light greatsword video when I do upload it. And hey, maybe leave a like on this video while you're down there. But for now, let's get into things, starting with the moveset. All three great katanas have the same base moves. Their light attack is a mix of slashes and thrusts. Due to weapon size, this has pretty considerable range and is a good way to keep enemies at a distance. Whereas the heavy attack is sweeping slashes. This is a very wide reach. It's great for AoE damage. It hits a whole lot of stuff, but it's not necessarily the best against a single boss, as the swing is much slower. And I kind of like this, because very often a big weapon is just a little bit too slow with all of its attacks. This way the light attacks are relatively fast, much like a curved greatsword, whereas the heavy attacks are slower, like you'd expect for a weapon of this size. Now, if you're familiar with the Uchigatana Nagakiba or Moonveil Katana, you'll find the moveset to be somewhat familiar. Though unlike those weapons, I don't really recommend dual wielding these. I'm sure you can, but ultimately the dual wielding moveset feels lackluster, and I'd much rather just two-hand them for the big overhead chops such as the jump attack. Now while they do share a moveset, each of the great katanas does have a unique Ash of War, so I'll get into those shortly. But for now, let's start with where to find them. First up, the Great Katana. I'm starting with this because it's the easiest one to get, you can get it earliest in the game, and you technically don't have to kill anything. Just head north from the 3-point cross until you reach the Great Bridge North site of Grace. Then from there, go west and head toward the lake where you'll find a sleeping dragon. Now you have two choices. First up, just run past the dragon, loot the corpse beneath it, and grab your great katana. Then you can leave or die to the dragon, whatever is your pleasure. Option 2 is to kill the dragon. And if you plan to do that, I recommend getting the second great katana first, as that weapon's actually quite good against dragons. So now a little bit more about the great katana itself. Because this is a regular weapon, you can infuse it or change the Ash of War. And personally, I found qualities the best, at least if you're going for pure physical damage. Though this will depend very much on your build. You can also convert it over to a variety of damage types, or use enchantments like the Blood Flame Blade. Now generally speaking, this weapon is a little bit too slow for statuses, but you can still do things like convert it over to cold, simply for the base damage against cold vulnerable enemies. The default Ash of War is Overhead Stance. Hold R2, then hit R1 to release a single strike while stepping forward, adding a surprising amount of mobility. Or hold L2, then press R2 to execute a quick series of slashes, which contribute a significant amount of poise break. They also do pretty good damage. Out of all three weapons, the Great Katana is the most flexible, since it's a normal weapon which can be infused. But also I'd say the Ash of War is a little bit lackluster in comparison to what the other two offer. I found I was getting quite a bit of use from the single strike and not as much from the quick slashes. While the chops are fun and all, the animation's just a little bit long, which makes it slightly impractical on bosses. And by the way, if you want to do a lot of damage, go with a jump attack. It's genuinely excellent. Now, the second Great Katana is the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana, which requires that you kill the Ancient Dragon Man. To start with, head south from a Pillar Path site of Grace. From there, kill any stone birds you encounter, or simply run past them until you're invaded and attacked by the Ancient Dragon Man. After defeating the invader, continue along until you reach the Dragon Pit. I've already defeated him, so I'm going to skip the invader part here and just go straight into the Dragon Pit. Now in here, you need to explore the dungeon. It's a little bit windy, but as a general rule of thumb, mostly go left. Watch out for ambushes, deal with the skeletons which you find. There's a few of them, some of the fire-breathing ones. Overall, I didn't find them to be the biggest threat, but they're definitely dangerous if they catch you on unawares, or if you're fighting multiple at once. So after proceeding through the dungeon, you'll reach an altar. And it's time to make a leap of faith into the abyss. Don't worry, there's no fall damage here. Once you safely land, proceed through the golden mist and challenge the Ancient Dragon Man. His melee attacks have a lot of reach, so do be careful about rolling backwards. Very often, he'll slash, you'll roll backwards, and then he'll thrust, and you'll be standing up from your roll and eat the attack to the face. Also, when he uses one of his draconic incantations, Run Away. These do a massive amount of damage and can straight up one-shot you. However, as he's casting them, he is also vulnerable, so if you get behind him in the right way, it might be a very good opportunity for damage. Personally, instead, I used it as an opportunity to play safe and heal. Now, in terms of raw stats, I would say the Dragon Hunter's Katana is the worst of the 3 great katanas. And that's because of the special anti-dragon properties. If you want to fight some dragons, this weapon is excellent. The Ash of War, Dragon Wound Slash, can either be tapped to execute a rapid strike or held to unleash a more powerful slash with more range that absolutely destroys dragons. And when I say destroys, I mean it takes chunks of health off. It's regular enemies pretty hard too, but again, that's probably not what you're going to be using it for. And because this is a somber weapon, you can't infuse it or change the Ash of War. Now personally, I found the dragons in Shadow of the Erdtree to be a little bit annoying, and by a little bit annoying, I mean super tanky. And I kind of suspect the reason they have so much health is because you're meant to use this weapon specifically to cut them down to size. So if you're a strength dex build, I would strongly recommend getting the Dragon Hunter's Katana. Even if you're not going to use it a lot of the time, just take it all the way up to +9. That way you don't have to use any ancient somber stones on it. It'll still have more than enough damage to easily deal with dragons. But if you want a great katana that not only feels good against regular enemies, but also does surprisingly well against bosses, then I would recommend the Rakshasha's Great Katana. To begin with, you'd need to get access to the Recluse's River by proceeding through Shadowkeep, through the Watering Hole, and all the way down until you reach the Recluse's River downstream Site of Grace. This is going to be the starting point for my guidance. From there, head over the cliff face and jump to the left, following the tombstones all the way down until you reach another river. After you do, follow this path all the way around the big rock, and you'll see the Eastern Nameless Mausoleum. Within is where you will challenge Rakshasha. And no, Rakshasha is not an easy fight. If you fought the Gale Knight, yep, imagine the same level of pain, but maybe even a little bit worse. Be especially mindful of Rakshasha's Weed Cutter, a series of flowing strikes that can be chained almost endlessly. Personally, I found the most success by using a hit and run playstyle, focusing on jump attacks with the Great Star's Mace and a Claw Talisman. But I'll be the first to admit that this fight took me over an hour. What you're seeing right now is a replay where I jumped into someone else's world to give him a hand and take out the boss. Now, Rakshasha's Great Katana is, well, great. It deals solid physical damage, has high dex scaling. Unfortunately, because it's a somber weapon, you can't change the scaling of the Ash of War. But the Ash of War itself, Weed Cutter, is very, very good. It's a highly FP efficient double slash, which allows you to cut your way through hordes of enemies, and it even gives you super armor, so you're unlikely to be interrupted while executing this. I haven't tried it in PvP, but I suspect this is an absolute nightmare of a weapon to deal with. I've only used it in PvE so far, and even there, it allows me to just brute force through certain enemies who would otherwise interrupt me with their attacks. You know, things like those really fast-hitting curse blades? As long as I have enough flask charges, I can just spam Weed Cutter and they will die before I do. Now, personally, I think Rakshasha's is a great katana. It's rapidly becoming one of my go-to weapons, replacing the Great Stars against most foes, the exception there being things that are weak to strike damage. I really love how agile the light attack feels, especially since this is a larger weapon and it still does a significant amount of poise damage. The jump attack takes off massive amounts of enemy HP, often hitting for 1,000 plus and sometimes straight up staggering them. And if there's ever a foe I just don't want to deal with, or more than one enemies, I can either use the heavy attacks or spam Weed Cutter. This is also why I'm not a big fan of the Dragon Hunters, because that katana feels like a less powerful version of the Rakshasha's, with the only outstanding thing being the Dragon Wound Slash Ash of War, which honestly is pretty cool and is slightly better, at least in my opinion. Feel free to disagree down below. And of course, if I need customization, then I'm going to go with the default Great Katana, as that allows me to infuse it. But if I'm not planning to infuse it, I don't need extra damage types. Rakshasha's is absolutely my go-to. Now, it's not going to be replacing my main weapon, i.e. the backhand blades, but I've definitely taken a liking to it, and I'm definitely going to use it as my default mounted weapon, plus as a thing that I grab when I need a big old bonk stick. So if you're a fan of oversized weapons and the Nagakiba just wasn't cutting it for you, maybe try out one of the great katanas. Now that you have their locations, it's just a matter of defeating a couple bosses, and I'm sure no one's ever found defeating bosses in a Souls-like game or a From Software title ever difficult at all. So it'll be a breeze. And for anyone who can't understand sarcasm, yes, that is sarcasm. Now that said, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on somber versus regular weapons? Do you like being able to change the element or swap up the Ash of War? Or as long as the default Ash of War is cool, are you perfectly fine with a somber weapon? For me personally, as long as the default Ash of War is cool, I'm perfectly fine with it being somber, but I'm curious some of your thoughts, so leave them down below. If you're looking for something else to watch, maybe check out my video on how to get the backhand blades. I feel like they're one of the strongest weapon classes added in the DLC, and I look forward to using them to beat the final boss, who I have discovered and I'm not going to mention who he is. Or if you're looking for more Elden Ring guides, head over to Maxwell GG, where we've got quite a few. Links to both of those will be up in the card and down below. Of course, before I go, a big thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is also down below. And a big thanks to everyone who watched to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Personally, I've really been liking Shadow of the Erdtree. Somehow, even over 30 hours into the DLC, things still manage to surprise me. I find weapons that I somehow missed before, or whole new areas that I just didn't know how to unlock. From Software has done an excellent job of preserving that sense of discovery, which I initially felt entering Limgrave and feeling like there's an entire world opening up before me. And so with that, I'm going to go work on my video for the light greatsword locations. Good luck in your hunt for the great katanas, and I'll see you in the next one.